Welcome to Decanted with Dave, Grega, and we are in episode 3 here. I'm really excited for you guys to get to know our guests. We're going to decant them and their stories. We have Corey and Fahad, the Keto Geeks, but they are much more than Keto Geeks. They're entrepreneurs. They are deep thinkers. They're interesting people, and I'm excited for you guys to get to know them a little better. Corey, Fahad, thanks for coming. I want to get into each one of you as individuals, what your origin story is. So maybe, Fahad, let's go ahead and start with you since you're on the left of my screen. Go ahead and give us a little bit of your origin story so people get to know who you are, where you're from, how you came to be where you are now.
So I was born in a city called Nashville, Tennessee. My dad got a scholarship. He got his master's from there. And then they decided, hey, we're not going to stay in the United States. They decided to raise me in a country called Pakistan, which is where they belong from. And so spent my 18 years over there, learned about the culture, the lifestyle, the craziness, the insanity, saw both of those wars, the Afghanistan and the Iraq war, both from both different perspectives. So that was a bit of an interesting sort of setup in life. And then I eventually moved back to Indiana, went to Purdue, got to shake hands with Neil Armstrong once. And so that was a big moment for me, being in engineering. I was forced to drop out after that point, and I had to take care of my family when my father passed away, and then started a business. I chased a gal to California. Don't try to do that. It really sucks. And then, well, things went crazy. I was listening to this one podcast. It was by Tim Ferriss, and he had Dr. Doug D'Agostino on there. And they were talking about something called ketogenic diets and cancer, and along with controlling diabetes and a lot of this cool stuff. So that's where I started to think more in terms of, hey, I want to do something more in life and not just, the daily grind of business and entrepreneurship. Let's create a difference. So that's how Keto Geek began. And we created these tiny little products called Energy Pods. Decided to share it with a bunch of gals at a yoga studio, including Corey, who's just joined me over here right in front of me. And so it went crazy from that point onward. And I'm really happy to say that we've touched the lives of thousands of people through our own podcast and our product. And I think, Corey, this is where you can connect the dots with your origin story too.
Absolutely. So I was born right here on the West Coast, here in California, and my dad was in the Navy. So we traveled up and down the West Coast growing up. So I grew up in a couple different places, didn't really settle down until about the age of 9, I want to say, or 8 years old, second grade, to give you some grounding, in a little city called American Canyon here in California, just about 15 miles south from where I reside today with Fahad in Napa, and David right here in Napa as well. So that's where it all started for me. I got into health and fitness at a pretty young age. I've been playing sports all my life, so I was very interested in the physical health of my body from the get-go. Around age 15 is when I really started to look at nutrition in an objective fashion, and I started to cut out soda. I was like, okay, soda is the worst thing I could possibly drink. Goodbye. But I kept up with Jack in the Box and other fast foods and fats and carbs together and all that stuff. And I just was young and naive and played with lots of diets when I was growing up from that age 15 to like age 25 or so. I experimented with every single diet you could possibly imagine. And within that time, I was also studying to become a yoga teacher. I started off as a student, age 19, practiced Bikram yoga to start off with. Did that for a number of years, probably like 5 or 6 years. And then I eventually got into Vinyasa yoga, which got me into Ashtanga yoga, which really spurred my interest in teaching that style of yoga. I had already been a teacher by the time I found Ashtanga yoga. I just didn't know what I wanted to teach, but once I got dug in my heels into that, that's what I really liked. And so I practiced and taught Ashtanga daily for 6 years, daily for 6 days a week for 3 years straight. So it was a pretty epic moment in my life, and that's where I met Fahad over at the yoga studio. And
okay.
Connected.
So Fahad, you were at yoga. That's where it was, the yoga studio.
It was the yoga studio.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
this crazy dude over here, I don't know where he's oriented on your guys' screens, but when he walked into the studio, he had this look on his face like, I'm going to destroy the world. I was like, holy shit, this guy's freaking intense. And his warrior too, like staring through your soul. But he
Yeah.
brought these energy pods along with him one day, and before that we were chatting, and he's very interesting, cool guy. But he brought the energy pods. The first iteration was walnut ghee.
Oh my god!
Remember that, Fahad?
Walnut ghee,
That takes me
yikes.
back.
Oh man, reminds me of that guy when we send. So we work with a lot of influencers, and we send one sample to this one dude, and it was kind of interesting how we didn't even have the word energy pods there. It was just like walnut ghee. Like, what the hell is even that stuff? So some of the influencers got really confused about that, and eventually we're like, we need to standardize everything. So that's why we went with energy pods. Note, energy pods, not keto pods, not vegan pods, not carnivore pods. Energy pods.
Just energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Okay.
walnut ghee, I remember that a lot. And what interested me with your product, Fahad, was back then was that you were using ghee.
Oh
I was
yeah.
like, holy shit, ghee is freaking awesome.
Right.
I was really into Ayurvedic studies at the time and Ayurvedic
Okay.
cooking styles, and I had like nailed the perfect ghee recipe. And I looked at what Fahad had in the kitchen. What the fuck is this shit? It's from Texas? Come on.
So wait, so for those some people don't know what ghee is. Can you just explain real quick
Oh, yeah.
what ghee is?
Ghee is it's simply clarified butter with all of the water removed possibly, and then a little bit more gentle cooking to bring in a nice toasty note to let those proteins that sink to the bottom get a little toasty, so it adds some. Why am I forgetting the word right now, Fahad? Help me out with some
The
science.
umami?
Yeah, basically it's just dehydrated butter, and it's more toasty, warm, and flavorful. And there's a bit of a story that we have over there while we were on the hunt to find the perfect ghee. Spoiler alert, we didn't actually find it. We ended up creating the perfect ghee. So that's what ended up happening. That
Okay.
was crazy. Yeah.
All right, so clarified butter. How'd you create the perfect ghee?
Oh man, I want to take this one on. It's because it's a funny story.
Or is that
All right, so when we were finding ghee, because the energy pods have this really interesting, creamy, rich texture to them, it's a genre-defining product that even our distributors, for example, have told us that it's literally going to create a new genre of food. So let's start off with that. But when we were looking at different types of clarified butters or ghees all around the planet, we were finding that most of the ghee or clarified butter was just so aggressive and tangy and burnt. Like Ancient Organics, love you guys, but seriously, their ghee was very intense.
Yeah.
So when you're creating something that is sweet and expressive and flavorful, then you have to find the perfect flavor carrier, the perfect fat. So for us, we decided, hey, these are too strong. We need to create our own stuff. So we reached out to different companies. We went all the way north to the south of the Bay Area and across California, even clover. We tried clover. We tried, what's the one that is really famous across all the keto zealots and people that we have around us, the Kerrygold one. So we tried them all.
Kerrygold,
And we decided, we came across our own way of really, really slowly making the ghee in a very active way. And that is how we were able to create something that was sweet and unique compared to some of the ghees that were out there and complemented the energy pods perfectly. As your listeners already know, that, for example, with something that is more flavorful, perhaps with wine or alcohol or foods, you need to find the synergy. So that's what we were after. And seriously, we also talked to the Ancient Organics people. We actually looked at their process too. They were about chanting in front of the ghee. I was like, oh, we kind of don't need the chanting.
And they had
We don't need. We'll kind of skip on that part. So instead, we focus.
Oh wait, and they produced on them.
Oh my God, that's like.
Oh, produced on the full moon. Okay, like biodynamics. Almost.
So we kind of skipped on that part, but we generally went for the science, learned about the crystallization. Interestingly, how fats are sort of as they cool, they crystallize. So depending on the crystallization of the fat, the texture can completely change. Now, for example, when you try a chocolate bar, you might notice that there's something called tempering the chocolate bar. That's the same exact process. So as the chocolate bar is cooling, it forms different stages of crystal networks. So the snap that you get at a very good chocolate bar comes from perfect crystallization. So we learned all of that pertaining to ghee. We're continuously experimenting and merging these combinations. So yes, that was a fascinating journey for us.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I definitely know what you're talking about as far as like a lot of the ghees that I first got into when keto was super popular, and I was doing the keto diet or a version of it, were very pungent, and it definitely was one of those things where if you cooked with it, it had a particular flavor, vibe, and aroma. So that's interesting because, I guess you found a way to get the water out of the butter and to sort of clarify it without burning it, or toasting it, let's just say, and make it more of a mild type of flavor.
Yeah, and
were you just experimenting in the kitchen on ways to try to get it done, and then you just sort of figured out a process?
Yes. So go ahead.
The way we figured that one out, we went to the store and literally just bought every single butter. Like, we just went to Whole Foods, and because they carry tons of butter from different companies.
Right.
So we just got one of each. Like, all right, let's just start testing and see what happens. And we did a really interesting experiment, actually. So we took these butters, and we cooked them all. And I think, Fahad, we did all of them, tasted through all of them, and then we used the same method with these butters. That was in round number 1 of experiments and research. In round number 2, we actually took the top 3 that we really liked. And then we bought multiples of each of those. And then we did high heat, low heat, medium heat, basically, were varying amounts of time. So we're just like really trying to control and hit what makes the perfect ghee and what actually ties all these methods together. And so we landed on a proprietary method that the alchemist only knows over here. A little bit of info with Fahad up there, just because he's a good friend. But yep, for the viewers out there,
Gee whiz. No, that should be your new screen name, Gee whiz. No, so hold on a second. So I want to go back to, it seems like it's pretty important that you guys met at yoga, right? Because none of this collaboration would have happened because of that. So tell me a little bit about that. So you're at yoga in Napa, and you meet Fahad. And you mentioned how he was super focused, laser sharp, just had a different vibe, instead of Warrior 2, he was in Warrior too much. So, how did this start? Where Fahad, you kind of had this idea, you had already had your walnut ghee and all of that, so you're playing around with things. How did you want to bring Corey in to collaborating with an idea on a product or a process?
The most important thing from an entrepreneurship and business perspective is you need to believe in what you're doing. That's very, very important. If you cannot believe in your vision or the things you want to do, other people are not going to buy into it. You have to be your first customer above all. So that is the vibe that you need to have when you're talking to new people about your product. And that is very beneficial. That's how sales works. That's how the world of business works. So when I walked into the yoga studio, my goal was that I know about this thing that may help thousands or countless people in their journey become healthier and happier, and we can create a great product. So initially, it started off with us wanting to create a bar. Interesting, right? We wanted to create a nutrition bar. Like, let's create a keto bar. But because of the fast that we were using, it started to melt quite a bit substantially. And then the gals at the yoga studio who tried the product, they said that, what if you just run with it? What if you go with sort of like a different texture, completely different texture? So that was the origin story of the energy pods. I met Corey because the guy was showing up to the yoga studio at bloody 5 a.m. Or before that.
Oh my God.
If somebody can go to a yoga studio in the middle of the night and turn them into a human pretzel, that is called commitment, my friends. commitment. And that's something that you need to find if we're looking for someone to take part of your business. And I noticed his work ethics, his commitment to a cause. So I was like, Corey, dude, I need some help with this product. I need to get the ball rolling. I'm looking for good people that are willing to change the world, who can see the vision that we're creating on the long haul. Then I started to talk to Corey. He came on board. He's like, dude, I can handle the production. I can get this stuff done. I'll make your life easy. He showed confidence, and he started working on all our projects and started to take initiative. Initiative is important. If you're hiring somebody, they need to have an initiative. You're working with somebody, whether it's a business partner, whoever it is, they need to go out of their way and say, hey, I'm going to be a bit more than just a grunt for a business. And that's what I saw in Corey, and he evolved. He evolved not just as a person part of Keto Geek, but as a human being as well.
Mm-hmm. Man, well, I mean, that's interesting how you were recognizing those things in particular. It wasn't just the person who was most excited about your pods or the person who was most into fitness and nutrition. It was more of a foundational aspect of like, what are some qualities this person possesses that makes them an outlier? These are kind of the qualities that I need for the long haul that are going to help me in this business and make for a good partner. I think that's pretty interesting that you had the insight to go for that, because not everybody would. You know, a lot of people would be kind of distracted by, you know, like I said, something like flattery, someone who's excited about the product, or someone who wants to volunteer and chip in and seems willing, and because it's easier that way, right? Whereas in some ways, it's almost more difficult because you're finding a person who has such a serious dedication, who's uncompromising in their dedication to something totally different, and you're asking them to then come and dedicate their time to this thing over here. That's a big ask for someone who is so serious about that, but it worked out. So Corey, what was going through your mind as were you just kind of like really excited? You were right on board right away, or why did this thing seem like something that was really interesting to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I to answer the first part, I did hop in right away pretty much. And that was just because I feel like I have a good judge of person and character in front of me. And when I met Fahad, I noticed he had intensity to him. And what I like about people with intensity is that they generally are real people, and are very honest and forthcoming. Fahad has nothing to hide from you. If you've ever met Fahad, the guy's going to tell you to your face how he feels right away. And if he feels like he's not going to vibe with you, he'll do it in a diplomatic and pragmatic way. He's not an asshole. So Fahad's a really, really good person. And I also noticed that he asks really sharp and pointed questions tinged with curiosity. And I really like that. I connect with people like him because in my mind, I'm always thinking about stuff. I always have curiosities. I have questions, and I have wonder. And I've been like that ever since a young boy. Like the first books that I picked up were astronomy books, and I was looking to the stars, and I memorized exactly how many planets there were, and yada yada. And I learned why the stars were there, why the planets were there. Fahad has this inquisitive mind that I share with him. And I think that's what really connected us on that level, whereas in what he saw in me was a serious work ethic. And yeah, that is very true. What I also saw in Fahad was the same amount of commitment and compassion for life. And I really like that. And I love that he just exudes excitement about whatever he's doing. And I didn't actually know about keto until I started talking with Fahad about it. And
okay, so he introduced you to the keto
really
thing.
Convinced. Yeah.
Right.
He just had some really cool stuff to share with me, and I started doing my own research, and I was like, all right, this guy's not messing around. This is some cool stuff. So that's just kind of how Fahad and I connected on that level. We're also like huge freaking nerds, like absolute crazy bonkers nerds. We were playing World of Warcraft for like 5 hours.
Oh man,
yesterday,
everybody knows now.
on Dragonflight.
I think that qualifies as nerds, yeah. That's okay though.
But it just kind of goes to show like what kind of crazy lifestyle we love to live. Like we have like a really serious, let's save the world kind of vibe to us, but we're also like, yeah, we're here for a short time. Let's have a good time. Woo!
Right. Do what you love to do. Have some fun.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like we've been talking about keto a little bit and the idea of this product that developed from experimenting with the different types of ghee and all of that. I know now, just from knowing you guys, that you're not in ketosis at least all the time. You're not on the keto diet, but your company's called Keto Geek. And maybe you started out experimenting with, ketogenic diet like I had done years back. And obviously the product has that name. So can you talk to me about how you started with keto and the keto diet and then sort of moved through and almost came full circle, I think? Because I think that's kind of an interesting idea. And it's interesting because I've also kind of had a similar kind of arc where I've gone from 0 carbs back to, a decent amount of carbs. And I've done through, eating. When I first started out, I was eating 5 times a day and then eating all the way to once a day and sometimes skipping a full day. And then now going back to like 3 times a day, So I'm curious to hear about your sort of arc with diets and keto and all of that. I don't know, whoever wants to take that on first.
Okay, I can take this on. When I was being raised in Pakistan, and I saw 2 different cultures, Pakistan and then United States, one of the most important lessons that I took was always lead with questions before you take actions. We all have the propensity to formulate judgments or thought processes. So that manifested itself into the Keto Geek podcast, which we started when the business started. We brought in some amazing guests, some crazy people at the same time. One of the most interesting one of the most interesting interview was with the carnivores. So if you guys didn't hear about the carnivore diet until like 3-4 years ago, there's a bit of a story there that we can share here. And so the questions, we asked some very sharp questions, talked to people who you would consider as athletic paradoxes, like a fruitarian guy running 100 miles, eating nothing but fruits. That is something that blows your mind. And at that point, right next to it is a guy who's lifting 145 pounds with one hand, eating just meat and water. So what is going on? How come there's a surgeon who is a complete vegan and is able to thrive on a diet? Carrie Dulles, she showed up to her podcast. Sean Baker, he showed up to her podcast. Amber Ahern showed up to her podcast. And we went into investigative mode. We went to the ends of the world. We even ended up in Hungary to talk to people like Paleo Medicina. And eventually this started to gain traction, and Joe Rogan heard about Sean Baker, probably because people started spamming towards him after our podcast. And so that's where the carnivore diet became crazy. So our journey from keto also evolved because of these questions. We started off with keto. We started to incorporate some of the carnivore diet elements. We learned from the vegans. We learned even from the fruitarians. I think one thing that's left is a breatharian to show up our podcast. But otherwise, we just asked the right sharp questions from the people that were on our show. And we started cherry picking information. Now, cherry picking is a term that's used in a negative connotation. But if it involves...
Sounds like a fruitarian phrase.
All right, I'll change the word. We extracted gold nuggets when we could.
Yeah, it's not a very keto-friendly phrase to cherry pick.
Oh, man.
Anyways.
Oh, man.
All right.
To listeners, David's basically the dad of Dad Joe. That's what I... Yeah. He's one of the coolest people ever.
My keto tagline is egg yolks and dad jokes.
But
anyway,
yeah, so that's where our journey evolved. So now we started to learn more about different kinds of ways in which food processing can be leveraged to improve foods. So that's been our current war that we've gotten ourselves into. I think that foods need to evolve. We need to understand. We need to work towards better science. Nutrition is one of the worst fields, because association can be always manipulated into a causation by anybody on the face of the planet. And we have some outdated ideas, but asking these questions, accepting certain paradoxes, while at the same time using high quality science to create better foods, that's been our journey right now. Is there something that I might have missed out on, Corey, here?
No, I think you've nailed it all down pretty quick there. Sounds pretty full-fledged.
So, Corey, I mean,
Absolutely.
like, I know, talking with you, you've been through that journey too, where you were pretty into keto for a while. You experiment just like Fahad, but you have experimented on your own with, doing different things like adding, doing some higher carb stuff, or
Yeah.
Doing some, obviously everything from low carb to high carb and whatnot. So there's a natural curiosity in both of you to play around with things. But one thing that I've noticed is you've been very open-minded about other ideas. So just because being in ketosis had a lot of benefits for you, felt great for a lot of reasons, was beneficial for a lot of reasons, you kept an open mind about other things and you were willing to investigate other things. And I think that that's pretty interesting. Can you tell me, from going from keto, being in ketosis and all that, and all the cognitive benefits that you experience and all those things, as you've integrated carbohydrate back into your diet, or as you did, were there any sort of revelations? And do you think that exploring that low carb space for a while is actually worth doing in order to renew your relationship with carbohydrate and your experience with carbohydrate? Or like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I think I can explain this from the way I teach yoga, actually, and the way I look at things. I like to try everything, as you know. There's a reason behind that. I like to try everything, not to the full extent. I kind of dip my toes, dip my fingers in just a little bit, and I don't go ham. I don't lock into that ideology.
Right.
And so when I teach yoga, if I want to teach you how to do downward dog for your very first time, I'm just going to ask you to get into the pose. Like, just straight up. Go ahead and show me your iteration, what you think downward dog looks like, what you think it feels like. Go ahead and just show me. Cool. And now once I've seen that, I will then start to make corrections and adjustments from that point onward. And the reason why I want to do that is to first get a foundation in that person's body. As a yoga teacher, like, I want you to start building your own practice from your own ground up, okay? And now I'm going to help you by showing you many variations of down dog, as many as possible, because then this will allow you to start to carve and form and shape your down dog that is correct specifically for you. And this is going to look different person to person to person to person. And the reason why I like to do that is to expose strengths and expose weaknesses. And I will sometimes on purpose teach really, really, really crappy down dogs. Like, here's a down dog that's just horrendous. And then it allows the person to get a range of feeling pretty much here. So, okay, down dog feels freaking crazy bad here because my upper back's in serious flexion. And this part, I'm going to have to make this adjustment here and get that extension in the upper back again. So there's a reason why I don't just toss everything out. With, the saying goes, don't toss out the cathedral with the bathwater. You want to keep everything in there. I know Fahad really likes to say that. No, I do borrow it from time to time. That was applied to my diet as well here. So I wanted to just try everything. Let's see what actually works for me. And I know Fahad said cherry picking earlier, but yeah, you can use cherry picking in what actually works for you. And I think keto is a really good starting point. It just seems to work for people, which is what I really noticed here. Wow, I can actually survive without carbohydrates. This is kind of cool. I like this. And so you keep that up for a while. And then you just start to you start from that elimination standing point, and then you add things back in based on whether they make you feel good and whether they taste good to you. And when I was doing extreme elimination diets, keto's in there, but I think the most extreme I've ever done, which was an 8-month stint of carnivore, just straight up eating meat products and animal products only, no carbohydrates, no plant foods whatsoever. Wow. The carbohydrates are probably coming from a small amount of sugar found in yogurts and cheese. Doing that, I was like, okay, this gives me like a really big, really nice base level to start off with. Now let's add in what works for me.
Right. What did you find was the difference between keto and carnivore in your, like, physically, and how you felt? And just the experience of doing that.
I I would say physiologically, keto was tough for me at first because I was a vegetarian keto. I don't recommend that to anybody.
Oh
It's
wow.
very difficult
Yeah, wow.
to get a good amount of protein in, because you're eating you kind of have to eat protein with fat at that point. Eggs and yogurt and cheese is what's gonna dictate that as a
Hmm.
vegetarian because you're not eating flesh whatsoever, which is like basically pure protein. So using a lot of dairy products, and I noticed that I was getting very overloaded with that kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, the dairy was the first thing that happens to me when I have too much is my nose just gets stuffed up. I couldn't stand that.
Right.
So started to add in meats later on to get into that. And I thought, like, my hypothesis was like, I haven't eaten meat in like years. Is this going to wreck my stomach? No, the opposite happened. I felt freaking incredible. So I
Imagine
was like,
that.
okay, let's go ahead and add this right back into the diet.
Hmm. So you think that the meat component really helped you? It wasn't necessarily carnivore versus keto. It was more of a no meat versus meat.
Now that to answer that, I can answer this question with a little bit more knowledge nowadays. I don't think it was per se the meat or per se the where that constituent came from. The constituent I'm talking about is pure protein, whole protein, complete protein.
Hmm.
It wasn't animal products. It wasn't that helped me per se. It was what the animal product was made of, and that's kind of how I look at foods nowadays. It's not pertaining to whether it's come from nature, whether it's been perfectly cooked, whether it's been this or that. I'll pick up a package and look right at the nutrition facts and decide, do I want to eat this or not? What is it made of? That's what I now look at rather than, oh, I'm going to have only animal products. Oh, I'm going to have only plant products. I want to find out what the carbs, fats, and proteins are in there and what binds those things and what comes along with those things as well.
Are you talking about oils and other things? So, like, in other words, something had perfect macros, but it had canola oil in it. That would be a no-no for
Like
you.
on the high level, I'm just basically talking about I don't really care where these things are sourced from per se.
Okay, whether it comes from a plant or not. I mean, so a lot of the, I guess, sort of warnings that people who are into carnivore or who are just into animal-based protein diets make when it comes to plant proteins is not just the discrepancy in the amino acid profile in each gram of protein, but what comes with it. The sort of add-alongs when you eat broccoli or a bunch of sweet potato or whatever it is, or kale, and how it's also processed too. But so along with all the broccoli, you get all of these things, or along with a lot of these seeds and things, you get all of these sort of poisons, things that disrupt absorption of micronutrients, things that disturb your gut and cause inflammation, et cetera, et cetera. And the argument is that you don't have as many of those things, and in some cases none of those things when you're going to eat a product like a meat, some kind of meat like a steak or something like that. And so that sort of affects how your body responds to the macros. It could be the same macros, but coming from different sources, and your body can respond differently. It can have different inflammatory consequences and therefore different effects on metabolic health. It can affect how you absorb nutrients. It can affect whether you build up oxalic acid and end up with an issue there, or too much uric acid, and so on and so forth. So, like, you're kind of keeping it a little more simple. You're saying, look, I care more about whether it has the right amount of carbs, fats, and protein for what I'm trying to do. Is there an aspect of, like, I also care about how I feel? Like, in other words, like, if I eat this versus this and they have the same macros, but I feel better eating this, just me personally, that I'm, even
absolutely.
if it's not made out of, like, even if it has if it's a plant-based product and it has 10 carbs, 10 fat, and 4 grams of protein, and I like to eat it and I want those macros for right now, that I want to go for the plant-based one because I like it and it's hitting the macros that I need. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, if it's basically if it tastes good and it's ringing the bell of good macros, or if it fits my macros, or if I literally just want to eat it and I know that it makes me feel good and I know that I don't get indigestion or weird stuff happening from that, yeah, I'll go ahead and eat it.
Okay, but it's not so much like there's a certain like thing like I just don't eat anything with canola oil in it, or if I can help it.
No,
Okay.
no, I don't really choose based on that.
Okay.
I mean, the stuff that like people are worried about eating, for example, like the thing that kicked me out of carnivore was the skepticism surrounding really cool stuff like nuts. When people started bashing the crap out of nuts, I'm like, okay.
Nuts and honey.
Yeah, nuts.
Yeah, that's a big one that Carnivore MD deals with when he was he got on the whole couple tablespoons of honey per day thing, and he just got a lot of flack from the carnivore community for that. He just thought it was so ridiculous.
That's the kind of stuff I don't want to get from other people, and that's why I don't really associate myself with folks like that.
Right.
It's like, you guys are just haters just for what I eat. Come on now. I wanted to eat nuts again because they tasted good to me.
Right.
And their macros are incredible, and they help make you feel full and satisfied with what you just ate. And also, I could eat energy pods again, so duh.
Right. That's the number one reason. Nuts is interesting. I go through phases with regards to like, cashews, almonds, and walnuts and whatever. Sometimes if I'm craving something, I'll go ahead and go for it. But I'm just like, they're so caloric, and which can be a good thing if you have a good relationship with food and you have properly balanced satiety markers, and like I said, a good relationship with your body to recognize those things. And I think they can be really powerful. Obviously you do, but I've heard a lot of criticism from like the health community. Now it's like the cool thing to do is be like, oh yes, you think this is healthy? It's not. There's 500 calories in this bag of mixed nuts and only 24 grams of protein or whatever. And so it's interesting that you've allowed yourself to drown out that noise and listen to yourself and make it work for you, and have the strength and courage to be able to do that, even though you take health and nutrition very seriously. So I think that's pretty cool, because it doesn't make sense to me. There's so much criticism of nuts, but not as much criticism of nut butters, although there still is criticism of nut butter. But, nut butter is seen as this holy thing. But if you have it in its unground form, then, no go,
Yeah. There's a lot of...
Exactly.
Fahad, well, go ahead.
No, it's just there's a lot of actually misconceptions and stuff. Like Corey was talking about how certain diet communities. So here's what happens. I think everybody can relate to this in any diet community. I don't care if you're a vegan or a carnivore or a breatharian.
Mm-hmm.
You log into Facebook, you log into their social media account. You have to understand that there's a lot of wanting to control and narcissism involved in social media interaction. That's something that we need to evolve past over time. Perhaps people who are listening can do that. But you start noticing that, okay, look, let's say I cut out nuts this month. And then somebody on the social media is going to say, hey, you cut out nuts, but you added 1 teaspoon of flavoring to your meat. That's wrong. Oh, you had coffee while fasting, or you had coffee at all. And you start getting into those extremes where it becomes more about me wanting to control you rather than me wanting to help you. So that becomes a bit of a problem. Mm-hmm. One of the recent things that blew my mind, Stephan Guyenet, he's one of the guys who's written a book called The Hungry Brain. Really good, neuroscience, all that cool stuff. He wrote an article very recently on Examine, and he talks about addiction and foods. One of the things that blew my mind regarding food addiction was that the amount of people who are addicted to food is about 5 to 10% based on Yale's food addiction scale, which is considered one of the most reliable ways. So then you realize that, hey, online, everything seems to be addictive. Meat is addictive, vegetables are addictive, everything is addictive. And then you realize, hey, obesity is like 40%, people who are overweight is like 80, 70%, not 80%. Addiction is 5 to 10%. What's going on? These numbers don't add up per se. And then you realize, oh no, this has more to do with somebody wanting to tell you what not to eat. And hey, go buy that extra supplement that I'm selling. Go buy that recipe that I'm selling. So it turns into that kind of atmosphere, which is sort of like a contagious thing that is happening in our nutrition sphere. And perhaps we can do some more damage control over time using that. with regards to protein, one of the most interesting things that I recently found out, and you can have this tested by either Lane Norton or someone like Dr. Stuart Phillips. I think he's one of the key dudes behind the whole protein research. Is that if you match, like, for example, the leucine content for the plant-based protein, it performs equivalent to like the animal-based protein sources. Yeah,
which makes sense, right? If you have the same amount of leucine.
So these were some of the things that I started to excavate when I started to move away from the keto and sort of the carnivore echo chamber and started even engaging with the plant-based folks. So that was some revelations that I came across on this topic specifically. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
So you're saying, like, if you're going to eat, let's say you're going to eat vegetarian, it's more difficult to get and to consume from my perspective, and I think probably from most people's perspective, realistically, especially if you're eating whole foods. Yeah. You're eating whole foods and you want to get 100 grams of protein from plants versus meat. It's much easier to do it with meat. You could probably do it with less calories, certainly with less volume, and probably less tummy ache. And so would it make sense that if you are choosing to consume, a plant-based diet, that realistically supplementing with something like a branched chain amino acid could help in that way, so that you don't have to eat giant loads of broccoli and what kind of ridiculous meals to hit your, or would you just say, look, just get a plant-based protein powder, take a couple scoops a day and call it,
I think something like that might be a great idea for someone who's plant-based. Now, I'm not a perfect expert per se on plant-based diets. For me, the expertise, or if you want to call it, ends at me going to a vegan friend's party and grabbing the meat that's over there that is relatively higher in protein and just consuming that. But I would imagine that for someone who is in the plant-based community, and that's one thing that a lot of people in the plant-based community need to realize, is that, hey, we need to improve the protein quality that is in our foods. Just because it says vegan meat doesn't mean it's protein heavy. Corey, you probably know, since you were vegetarian at one point, that many of these alternative meat products have more carbs than protein, which is kind of missing the whole point of, or a huge part of the point as to why people even consume meat products.
That is so true. You'll turn over the package of vegan cheese, for example, and it's fat and carb. Fats from the plant oils and then their carbohydrates is actually what creates the structure and binds those fats. And they typically will use modified starches from potatoes or like oat fibers or hemp hulls or whatever.
Yeah, so that's a big problem with the plant-based community, is that they're trying to copy the meat, but they're not matching it when it comes to the nutritional component of it.
Specifically the amino acids.
Exactly, that's a good one. Yeah.
And the micronutrient profile.
Oh yeah, micronutrients get ignored a lot of the times when compared to the meat-based products. And it's like, guys, try to copy that, or if you want to improve it somehow, improve it. But don't just call it meat without the punch that the meat brings with it.
Yeah.
Right, so that's interesting. Okay, so there are a lot of places that we can go here. I think that I'm pretty interested in hearing about, and I don't really know too much about your experience with this, but I know a little bit, so I want to kind of hone in on this. I know that you guys have been playing around with the idea of processed food, sort of looking at processed foods through a different lens. Finding a way to find some positives in processed foods, to redefine what that means, to look at sort of a brighter side of that, and to sort of change the narrative around processed foods. I know, Fahad, you've talked to me a little bit before about looking into what actually makes you feel full, what is actually satiating, and what is sort of the story is that these things make you feel fuller, but actually the research shows that, you can get just as much satiety out of this macronutrient profile with a processed food as with a steak or something like that. Can you guys kind of walk me, whoever wants to, if you guys want to switch off, dive into that whole realm, because I think that that's pretty interesting. It's kind of a hot topic.
Exactly. First of all, let's point out the most obvious thing. There is a problem with modern processed foods, a huge problem. Dr. Kevin Hall, cool dude, great mathematician, came up with a study, and it pointed out that there is a problem with processed foods. I think that if you are a food company or a food scientist or a researcher or a nutrition person, anybody, you need to understand that processed foods are definitely problematic. Now, here's the thing, though. The number one reason why people can't stick to a diet is any diet, is because it is a lack of adherence. People fall off the bandwagon. So whether it's a carnivore diet, whether it's a vegan diet, people want options. People want to explore different kinds of foods. So we started looking into the scientific research pertaining to all of this insanity. We talked to actual food scientists. Dr. Julian McClements, he's a phenomenal researcher and a food scientist. He's a legendary food scientist. We had a podcast with him. So we came to the conclusion that one of the most strongest factor when it comes to satiety and energy intake and satiation, all of this stuff is the architecture of food. And it is further substantiated by the fact that they've done some studies that would compare, let's say, a vegan meat product versus an actual meat product. Now, we're not talking about the nutrition quality. I think that the meat itself is far superior in nutrition quality and everything.
Sure. We're talking about what makes you feel
so this is a totally different,
and allows you to adhere to
exactly. A diet. So this is a totally different topic. We're not talking about long-term health outcomes. It's more about energy intake here. So in the context of energy intake, they started noticing that even with variable proteins, these structures that were very similar performed similar too at reducing intake. And then, even more interesting, was that if you turn any macronutrient, whether it's a carbohydrate, fat, or protein, and turn it into a hydrolyzed drink with low viscosity, totally similar, they all will favor a positive intake, positive energy intake. That blew.
Right. So it's not as fulfilling to have a protein shake. I mean, I think everybody knows that, right? You can have 250 calorie protein shake, whey protein shake, and you get 60 something grams of protein. But it does not feel like eating 60 something grams of protein.
Exactly.
And it's just anybody who's ever tried to do the bodybuilding thing knows that. And I think bodybuilders also use that to their advantage. People who are trying to get high calories, who are trying to pack in 280 grams of protein in a day and 3,200 calories in a day every single day. They have to drink 2 or 3 shakes because they can actually consume that volume of food and make it work day in and day out. But most people aren't trying to do that. They're trying to do kind of the opposite of that, right? So what you're saying is it turns out that the structure, and by structure, do you mean more of the chemical makeup, like how it's actually binded together? Or are you talking more about texture, viscosity? What are you talking about? The way that it, what do you mean by structure?
So at the end of the day, it is chemistry. Because that's how food breaks down and creates energy for our body or creates the building blocks. Right. But the chemistry is dictated by physical factors. Like, for example, your stomach is basically like a sluggish Vitamix that moves at certain patterns, at certain frequencies. Our mouth is a masticating sort of sluggish food processor too. So once you take food through this entire GI tract, our entire stomach, our mouth, and all of that stuff, you start to come across some interesting revelations about these foods, like even certain things like high in volume may not be as filling. For example, cotton candy, hypothetically, high volume food, favors a positive intake. Sure. Let's take soda. Soda is an example of low energy density, high volume, but almost every study that we know about, a soda with sugars or calories in it is going to favor a positive intake. It's just undeniable.
Sure.
So it's a little bit more complicated. But the way we talk about it backstage at Keto Geek is that if something is structurally complex, it is probably going to be either normalizing or it would lead to fat loss. If it's structurally poor, then it is probably going to favor a positive intake. That's how we try to explain it to a lot of people. But you're right. It's a multidisciplinary approach. This is going to be the future of foods. We know this because some of the leading institutions, such as like the Quadram Institute and Infogest, these are European bunch of scientists sitting together, doing these presentations, they're exchanging research papers, they're creating these models to mimic that, to capture that. So right now, the biggest, so the alternative to that sort of approach that is being used in a lot of the mainstream news as well is the NOVA classification. I don't know if you've heard of NOVA classification, but that is one way that scientists are trying to understand processed foods. Okay, so basically the NOVA classification translates into is that if it's more processed, then it is more than likely going to be associated with more poorer health outcomes. However, there are fundamental flaws to this approach because we know from human trials that even in certain studies where they used completely ultra-processed foods, they perform superior in certain ways. And then there are studies showing that, for example, zero-calorie sweeteners and those kind of things can be really beneficial. So these outliers start collectively forming their own science, and we're like, as a food company that wants to help people, we can't rely on a model that is so flawed, like the NOVA classification, where they say more processing is bad. It doesn't work. So that's why we are more focused on the food structure aspect of foods, because it seems to be the unifying factor between different kinds of foods. So that's where we are at the moment. Is there something I missed out, Corey?
Yeah, Corey, I'm curious. What's your experience? Because you've experimented a lot with these different types of processed foods, different types of structures in foods, and you're pretty self-aware of how things, and you've had a lot of different diets. So, like, what have you found that sort of echoes what Fahad is talking about? As far as experimenting with the different structures, and what are some of the discoveries or sort of aha moments that you've had, if any?
Yeah, the food. When I started to look at food structure, that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier. Like, what comes with the calories that I'm eating. What I meant really by that was like, how are these calories structured, and what comes into these, what comes along with these calories, what kind of free fats am I going to be getting with my vegan meat, for example. The revelation really hit me when I was eating like when I kind of rescanned my past, and I was like, that's probably why I felt so hungry on a freaking vegetarian keto diet, is because the foods that I were eating were extremely poor in structure. They were giving me energy, but they weren't, they were just basically running the stoplights in my GI tract. Like, they weren't really triggering or activating any sort of signaling in my body. Like, if you just eat straight up protein yogurt, you're going to eat protein yogurt in about 30 minutes, if that's the only thing left in your fridge, because you're like, I'm hungry again, but I just literally ate like 30 grams of protein. What is going on? When I did add in back the meat is richly structured, really, really richly structured, and that's because proteins form strands, and those strands bind together really nicely. When you rip apart a chicken or pork, you can pulled pork or pulled chicken, you can see the strands coming apart. And that's the structure of the food there, and that was eating those types of meals with meat or with something that was a little bit more structured heavily than something like yogurts or eggs, for example, were providing a lot more satiety and even lengthening that time that I felt full and satisfied and happy. That's where these things really started to make sense. And I also started to, over time, as I opened up my mind and opened up my diet as well, experimenting with more different types of processed foods and whatnot, and even stuff that Fahad and I create in the kitchen just to experiment with it, like gums, for example, and lecithins.
Right.
Those are really interesting things. You can instantly increase the volume of stuff by simply adding a gum to it. And that will, in turn, help you feel more full for a little bit longer.
Right.
So
I used to do that with oatmeal. I used to put like gum in oatmeal.
Yeah. That's freaking awesome, man.
But too much though, man. If you add just a little bit too much, and you're like, oh my god.
It's a fiber. I that's what I really found fascinating was just those tiny experiments we would do in the kitchen, and then
Yeah.
expanding my search for processed foods that did have these things, and confirming that yeah, that works. I bought that from the store. It had xanthan gum, and this yogurt, because it had xanthan gum in it, made me feel a little bit more full.
So what are a few
And
examples of some of these type of foods like that were very satiating, and specifically because of the structure?
I'm gonna toot my own horn just for a tiny second. Energy pods do it. They just do.
Is that's intentional? You guys
Yeah,
designed that.
it was very intentional.
Yeah, Fahad looked into the studies of those, and once Fahad confirms the studies are good and legit, we'll start adding these things to our products, especially if they have a huge safety factor. We want those, and if they're going to help people feel fuller for a longer period of time and not consume a ton of soda and Chips Ahoy later in the day, then yeah, this is a helpful product, and we're gonna use that stuff. But yeah, look for yogurts if you want like yogurt and you want to feel a little bit more full. Look for stuff that I think Oikos does it, but they add gums and fillers to their yogurts that will actually help you feel a little bit fuller a longer period of time. Don't be afraid of those things. There's a lot of good safety data on.
A lot of people go, "Oh, artificial this, artificial these fillers." Like, stay away, right? You'd hear that from purists, right?
Right.
Bad for your body.
One of the things, Fahad, you'll have to jog my memory, but we spoke with a chemist who blew both of our minds. Basically, everything is, once you have looked at the world through a chemist's eyeballs, you quickly realize, okay, I am chemicals. Which chemicals are safe to put into my chemical body? And then when you start looking at the world through the lens of a chemist, you start to laugh at words like organic, because the word literally means carbon-based. And then you start to question these movements like organic and plant-based, blah, 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 all these buzzwords and stuff. But
fossil fuels also means
a little bit.
Fossil fuels also means carbon-based. Has nothing to do with fossils. But it's interesting how titles get hung up on. It's like,
right.
There's not a lack of carbon-based fuel sources. There's not a lack of organic fuel sources. It's like,
no.
It's interesting how things.
It's all organic, man.
Right. It's like oh wait a minute. It's not actually. People think it's like fossils. And it's like, oh, there's only so many fossils in the ground. Like, what if we run out of? It's like, no. It's things that have carbon, things that were organic, that are broken down.
You are carbon, my friends. Like, carbon-based life forms.
So it's just interesting. It happens outside of the food industry. Can you guys tell me, like, so I'm just thinking to myself in my own experiment, my own personal experience. I know for a fact, like, things like hard-boiled eggs. If I eat 3 hard-boiled eggs, I'm like full for hours, and that's one of the foods that I go to if I'm in one of those. Oh man, I need to watch what I'm eating, kind of thing. I had too much yesterday. Today's one of those days. Yesterday, I went crazy at a sushi restaurant, and I had like 10 sushi rolls, and So today I'm like, back to eating a lot of hard-boiled eggs. That does it for me, but. What else is it? On the flip side, every single time I try, because I actually like the taste of kombucha. I don't really care too much about the benefit to the gut, although that's cool. I kind of just like the fizzy and it's not a huge sugar-based drink per se. I mean, it has sugar in it. It's not a Coke. It's not a Sprite, but it kind of is refreshing and whatever. Has some flavor to it, and there's some health benefits theoretically, but like every time I drink kombucha, it just, whether it's 25 calories or 65, 70 calories for a bottle, it's always makes me more hungry. It makes me like want to eat. It doesn't satiate me. It makes me want to eat more food, and ultimately I think it hurts me. And every time I drink it, I'm like, why did I waste those calories? Like that could have been 2 small eggs or 1 jumbo hard-boiled egg, and I would have been so much better. But, so those are my experiences, like, with just 2 foods that have those sort of opposite effects. Can you talk to me a little bit more about, you mentioned the keto pods. The Keto Geek pods are one of those things that really gives you a lot of satiation. and also provides you with a lot of good nutrients, good macronutrient profile. What are some other things that have provided you with that sort of positive, like filling and also reasonably healthy for you? And then some things that kind of like kombucha for me, which is just a bad idea for me personally, that sort of lead down that road for you guys.
So, Corey, you can start off, and then I can talk about the framework sort of prototype that we've been sort of thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite foods right now that have been working out really well for me, Foster Farms makes these chicken pizzas that are, there's no carbs in those whatsoever. The crust itself, they're so good. The crust itself is made of ground chicken, egg whites, and mozzarella. So it has this like almost fluffy like protein crust per se, and then they just add a bunch of cheese on top, and you can add whatever else you want. There's a nice sauce that goes on there. I think it's just like a really bold Robusto tomato sauce. But this food really works out very nicely for me. Even though it is ultra processed,
Right.
like I said, I'm looking at what is going into these ultra processed foods and how they're structured and what is coming along with these things. And typically I will look at first the carbs, fats, and proteins. And then I'll look at what those carbs, fats, and proteins, what is making those things. For example, if something like a Quest bar, it's going to have a lot of carbohydrates and fibers from soluble corn fiber.
Yep, I think so.
Right?
I think so, yeah.
Is that what's in there? Yeah. Yeah, that stuff, if you have like too much of it, your gut's going to explode. Like, it's not cool.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at...
I like Quest bars, I'm not gonna lie.
They're really good.
I like the birthday cake ones. That's the thing. I have to have 2 birthday cake ones. It's like...
That's when you have to stop. You have to stop right there.
Yeah.
So that would be an example of, the Quest bar is an example of, I can't eat too much of that. It tastes good and it works, but there's definitely a really, really low threshold to it.
Right.
So I'll stay away from stuff like that. But stuff that has like a high threshold, you look at the ingredients, you're like, okay, there's eggs, there's cheese, and there's meat in that. And you've eaten all those things all your life and you know they work. So why not eat it in a processed form? So that's an example of two things that work out for me.
If I were to add one very controversial food that I've been consuming for the last 1-2 years in my sort of processed food sort of diet is air fried chicken. And air fried chicken.
Hell yeah!
How controversial is air fried chicken? I love the air fried chicken.
Air fried chicken. You have to specify that.
So you just put like a panko crust on there
and
go for it?
No, we'll go straight to the frozen aisle, find chicken breast, go straight to the frozen aisle, grab the frozen chicken that it has breast meat with bread around it. That is, I think, a relatively safer option. I look at the macros. I make sure that there's enough protein, not like 50 carbs and 3 grams of protein. I'm exaggerating, but sometimes it feels like that. It's like you're just eating bread at that point. But if there's like a good sort of air fried chicken, which has like 15 grams of protein, 15 grams of carbohydrates, maybe like...
There tends to be a lot of fats in those things. That's what ruins it for me. It'd be like 15 grams of fat in like a 3.5 ounce serving. I'm like, fudge, man. I would rather just put a glob of butter on my food.
Which is why getting the breaded breast meat is a little bit of a better option in those regards. So that's a really good one.
Right.
Chicken breast nuggets could be probably a very good option. Air fried, though. Besides that, I think a lot of lunch meat is relatively higher in the sodium, but people are fighting about the sodium wars at this point. I have no sort of vendetta in there. So wherever you stand on that, that's a good one. Yeah.
Kind of
and
sodium.
then there's one of the recent foods that we found were these salmon sausages. Those are freaking amazing.
Salmon sausage.
Really tasty, really spicy,
really tasty.
And they're like very protein heavy.
Interesting.
And then
oh no, wait. What about Atlantic versus wild caught salmon? That's like one of the biggest, most triggering things.
I'm gonna say exactly. I don't know either. I have no.
Yeah.
Dude, I go and fish for my own salmon if I want to get some salmon on my own.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice.
Another one would be like barbecue pulled chicken is a good option as long as you add like a 0 calorie sauce to it. I think that would be a good idea to go about it. Because one of the things we found is that this is some conjecture, some hypothesis, and some science to it. So, for example, when you put like a barbecue pulled chicken, one thing that happens is that the sauce sort of leaves the structure. So that hydrolyzes and digests right away, which is why more than likely you're going to notice your blood glucose shooting straight up right after consuming one of these foods. Oh, and interestingly, potatoes, air fried potatoes are pretty good options too, as long as there's not a copious amount of fat in there.
Yeah.
Air fried potatoes. Potatoes are really interesting because if you look at the satiety index, that's a study that was once conducted where they took a bunch of foods and they started ranking them based on how much satiety they provide. Boiled potatoes are at the top, but here's an interesting thing, that it also has a very high glucose index, like a glucose load that comes with it. So people started asking the question, why is a potato so high in glucose, still so satiating at the same time? And we found out that it has more to do with the structure. So potatoes behave like a sponge in your body. So they expel out the sugars and simple sugars that rapidly digest and cause a glucose spike, leaving a husk behind, which causes the whole satiety response, which was really fascinating.
Right. Is there something that could have that same sponge, sort of that same texture and satiety factor without the glucose load? Or is there something that exists like that? Is a different kind of root, or is there, because I mean that's interesting to me. But this is again just boiled potatoes. This isn't mashed potatoes with loads of butter.
Yeah, I think condiments and free oils and free sugars and sauces and a lot of these things, I think these are the biggest culprits when it comes to positive energy intake. Yeah,
salad
it's like,
dressings.
It's crazy how much they add to it. Like, for example, recently we ordered Domino's for lulz and giggles and gamings, and we noticed that just one lava cake was like 350 calories. That's absurd! And then you eat 3 of those, which are easy to do, by the way, in one sitting. And then that's like, you're already at like $1,000. And then you notice this is part of the standard American diet, where you start off with a bagel in the morning, which is loaded with cream cheese, and then you end with a lava cake and donuts throughout the day. And you realize before the day ends, people are capping at like 3-4K, and then you're like, yeah, we know what's going on. We know what's happening. So another good food that people can add potentially would be oats. Like whole fruit oats are pretty solid from a high carb perspective. I'd also wager.
I had some this morning. I had quick oats with a half tablespoon of coconut oil and a little fruit and cinnamon.
Another food that you, David,
awesome.
sort of encouraged me to add into my diet was like this simple popcorn with not a lot of stuff added to it. That's a good one. That's a good addition.
I love that
stuff. Then another good food would be shrooms. Shrooms are pretty good. In a very recent study, they did a side-by-side comparison using mushrooms against meat, actually, lean meat. And mushrooms outperformed meat in energy intake, which was like, that's not how things work. But that was just what they found out. So that's a good option. I would say certain hard cheeses might be a good option as well in that regards. And I think fruits for the most part should be okay-ish. We know this one guy, what's his name? Michael Arnstein. He was a fruitarian. I mentioned earlier. He's running 100 miles, and he's on a 98% fruit-based diet, and he's not gaining weight. But then again, you can make the argument that the guy is an ultra-marathon runner. He's not going to gain weight, period. But that's the recurring theme we found out.
Sure, yeah. There's not a lot of obese ultra-marathons.
But then again...
I would love to see that.
So those are good food. And then I think that legumes and all those kind of things should be totally okay in that regards. So yeah, it's a mixed bag of drink. Yeah.
Oh, Fahad, remember the salad that we had over
God,
when we were working up there? The buckwheat. Yeah, so buckwheat.
Oh, I love
salad.
Yeah,
I think that
buckwheat.
Yeah, that was really good.
Go eat buckwheat.
Oh
Oh
man,
my
buckwheat
god,
is
I was
delicious.
blown away by
Yeah.
that salad. Hands down, one of the best salads I've had in my entire life. But yeah, go get some.
Yeah.
I think drinks are a huge culprit in calories, but if you can just replace those with like 0 calorie, low calorie versions, I think for many people that's a huge, huge, huge jump.
Right.
Um,
Right. Even if you're drinking kombucha, like I mentioned before, I've noticed kombucha, the difference between the 10 calorie kombuchas and the 90 calorie kombuchas is not really a lot. There is a little, they are a little sweeter, but as far as when you drink it and you have the experience of like feeling refreshed and, whatever, the difference is 80 calories, but you don't feel that difference. You're just loading an extra 80 calories, which again is a large hard boiled egg. I could drink that 10 calorie kombucha and have a hard boiled
yeah.
egg and I'm better off.
And then
That
yeah.
hard-boiled egg is
So you're on
better.
point with that
Yeah.
one. And what we found out is that we did a N equals to ourselves experiment on this, and we grabbed the protein waters, the isopure ones. So we did that,
Oh,
and we were
yeah.
like, yeah, we
I've
were
never
like,
tried
what?
that. Yeah. It's like 50 grams of protein in there.
It's about
right?
40.
The isopure ones.
There's a lot.
40,
So
it's a lot.
doing
Yeah,
a
it's lot.
workout
Yeah.
or doing like anything and just having that as sort of like a breakfast item, if you drink one of those, you are gonna be ravaging, or you're gonna be hungry and we're gonna want more.
Right. That's like a bodybuilder thing who needs to get 4,000.
Yeah,
calories.
or if you're like, for example, I've given up the notion of foods being bad or good because, you do get Thanksgiving, you do get Christmas, and you
Yeah.
do get like these occasions. You can somehow work some of these foods into your diet and lifestyle. At least that's my humble opinion.
Oh,
But
yeah.
you just have to be very strategic
Yeah.
about it and compensate those high calorie, poorly structured foods with something that may be more anorectic, like add some greens to it. And greens are almost always going to be sort of like,
So here's kind of my thought, and it just kind of goes back to what I was mentioning before, and it's sort of my theory. And, I had spoken about people having a relationship with themselves and their own intuition. And most people's intuition when it comes to food is not healthy. They don't have a healthy relationship with themselves and their own intuition. Because it's been swayed by emotional eating issues and other problems and other deficiencies and imbalances within themselves, both mentally and also then physically, that they need to correct and make whole and balance their relationship with themselves so they can have a good intuition and eat intuitively. You can't eat intuitively with a disconnect with your own intuition. If you don't have a healthy relationship with you and yourself, you can't understand what the difference between stress eating and or dopamine versus eating for something else. So, like, I feel like it's what really matters. When we were speaking just now about you can integrate things that are typically spoken of as unhealthy or bad foods, and I believe that you can. But first, I think that what you need to do is establish a healthy baseline. What I mean by baseline specifically is like you need to establish within your body has to know and have a rhythm that is at this standard, this particular amount of calories, protein. So hitting my protein goal, which for me is 1 gram per pound of body weight, hitting my protein goal and staying roughly within, roughly maintenance over a year. My weight fluctuates by 3 pounds either direction, right? So I'm sort of staying within a 3 pounds. So 1.5 pounds here, 1.5 pounds there from a number. So I'm pretty much staying close to baseline on average throughout the year. And I'm always hitting my protein goal. And so that is sort of the baseline for my body. My body knows that at maintenance, it can feel full and it can feel energized and it can perform well. And that is where my body has its I'm okay type of set point. I'm okay here. I'm okay here. Right? Whereas before, my I'm okay was in a calorie surplus because I had a lot of other issues. I wasn't balanced within myself. I didn't really have an intuition when it came to eating because my intuition was totally jacked up, by other issues and other things that I had going on. And I didn't have a really good relationship with food in my body. I was stress eating and emotional eating a lot. I was eating a lot of things that were not really, that were just, I was eating a lot of like pastas and breads and just, not focusing on my macronutrients, that not worried about hitting my protein goal and thinking about how many calories I'm eating and whatever. But it wasn't until I forced myself to eat at that what I could find at a healthy weight baseline. So a 171 pound baseline break even for me and for my daily activity on average, right? When I started eating for that, it was difficult at first, and I had to use all these tricks, and I had to use keto and some of these other things to sort of hack that and make it a little more fun and focus my mind and try to get me, sort of get me into a place for about 6 months to a year, where I finally dropped it to where I stayed at that. I created the new baseline at 171 pounds when I was 300 pounds. I said, I want to be 171 pounds. That's a healthy weight for me, with muscle and blah, blah, right? So I started eating for that. And the first year is what it took for me to get to that point where my body finally let go. And I kind of re-corrected my relationship with food. I set a new standard for my body, and my body finally yielded, like training a dog, right, with a training leash. It finally got it, and it was just automatic, where my body was like, okay, we can eat 2,400 calories every day, and we are totally happy, and you can walk 10,000 steps and be active, and you can throw some foods in that are bad and whatever, and it doesn't matter. So that now, like, we just recently had Thanksgiving feast, and you guys were there, right? I was eating all kinds of things, just yet last night I had this huge sushi gorge, whatever. But I know today, my body is going to make me feel a little bit less hungry than I was yesterday. It's going to make it easy for me to eat a few hundred calories below maintenance for a day or two, or even eat at around maintenance. And I'm going to be able to stay there. I'm not going to crave another round I could not go out tonight and eat a bunch more sushi or whatever. Like, my body's set point is here. And so it's saying, I don't need this now. We're okay down here. We're okay down here. And then if I get too low, my body's going to tell me, hey, we need a little more energy. And it's going to use that energy. So, but it took me years to reset that baseline and to build a good intuitive sense of eating. So I think that, like, that's my theory, is that it's like, it's really where you have created your own set point, and how healthy your relationship with yourself is regarding that set point, that really determines long-term success with diet, health, and food.
I 100% agree with having a solid framework and a solid baseline before you start delving into something more hardcore. Like, for example, Corey and I, so for us, we're in like stage 3 of that sort of stuff. Like, we can go walk into a buffet. We could go walk into any grocery store, gas station. We could flip the ingredient list and we'd be like, okay, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I don't care about how processed this is, but I know exactly what I'm going to get and what's going to happen in my body and all that stuff. And so for us, it's become to that level. But you're absolutely right in the sense that people do need a framework. Now, to criticize myself over here is that I don't have the extreme experience of losing a lot of weight, for example, that maybe you two may be able to elaborate a little bit more on. So I'll leave the stage to you guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, Corey, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Let's, gosh, I can't even really pinpoint what exactly brought me to my baseline per se. I think what really drove that, though, was just eating things that firstly tasted good, and then secondly made me feel good. The taste good thing is super important to Fahad and I, because we believe that taste is a main driver for adherence to a diet. Like, you have to look forward to eating your food. Have you ever seen your dog or your cat get pissed off that you're serving the same food at the same time every single day?
Yeah.
They're not getting pissed because they like the food. It tastes good to them. And I can attest that I've had dogs growing up. You try to give them food they don't like versus the food they do like, and even if they're hungry, they'll just ignore it.
Yeah.
They'd rather starve, and they'll eat it. They'll probably eat it when they are starving. They're like, okay, like now I can eat literally anything. But we're talking about a normal life on a day-to-day basis. Like, your food has to taste good in order to adhere to it, and then it has to make you feel good. And then you also have to arm yourself with knowledge. And the first piece of knowledge I armed myself with was that sugar. The first association I made with getting healthier and lowering energy intake as much as possible, which was when I was 15 and saw that sugar in soda was basically free calories, and I wasn't getting any sort of feeling of fullness from it. That's pretty much the reason why I cut it out. Also because of, tooth decay and other stuff that comes with sugar issues as well.
Right.
So kind of finding foods, again, that tasted good but didn't provide that extra energy,
Right.
provided that kind of thing. And also getting into cooking, cooking at home is also something I really, really, really dove into, and that's how I became a ghee aficionado, if you will.
A ghee whiz?
Cooking in. Yeah, exactly. I actually call myself Geezus, like Geezus.
Oh, okay. Careful. Don't call yourself geezy. Yeah.
More diplomatic, I can call myself the alchemist.
When you get older, you'll be a geezer. Oh, jeez.
Retirement homes and calling geezers.
Your first rap album will be Geese and Hose. All right. Anyways. All right. Enough with that.
You gotta clip that part.
Yeah? Okay, yeah. Cut it out.
Clip it and post it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, you guys are bad. Yeah. This podcast is rated geek.
This should be called the Dad Joke Podcast as a nickname.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's gonna get PG-13. Yeah. Corey,
going back to the topic.
Yeah. Okay.
Finding a diet that works for you. Yep. Find stuff that works for you that first tastes good and that makes you feel good, and also arm yourself with knowledge. Look for eat protein. You should be eating protein. Eat some. Don't be afraid of cholesterol. Don't be afraid of fat.
Sure.
Don't be afraid of carbohydrates. Just
Right.
kind of know how to navigate those waters, because all those things we've literally evolved side by side for millennia.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
I tell people, because people will ask me, how'd you lose all this weight? Blah 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 blah. Because I was over 300 pounds. But the one advice that I give is focus on protein. If every single time you put food in your mouth from here on out, you were trying to get a good amount of protein, you were really focusing on the protein as the main focus of what you're eating, you're going to lose weight. You're going to see better body composition. You're going to, most likely, it'd be really difficult for you to start just focusing on protein as your number one priority every time you put something in your mouth and start gaining a bunch of weight or feeling horrible. And so that's kind of the one thing that I tell people is just simple, quick
Yeah.
fix.
I would
about
I
carbs
would say
or
that.
whatever.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I also learned in leaning up, I used to be a husky kid when I was shorter, younger, and that's why I got into health and fitness, because I wanted to basically look better and feel better in my body. God dang it. One of the things that I realized about my eating patterns was that I was cutting out multiple fuel sources. I was not eating fats and carbs together.
Right.
One of my biggest advices for people: do not eat those things together, especially if it's
Oh my God.
in structure, like eating sugary and
yeah.
fatty cake.
It's a milkshake.
It's freaking terrible.
It's a milkshake.
But
Yeah, the milkshake is the
on the
killer.
flip side, you can literally create a cake that has the same texture, the same flavor profile, and is just as tasty, but it has way more protein,
Sure.
super low carbs, and moderate fat.
Right.
And I tell people, use those as your lever, because your body, it cannot pull, it can't burn fuel that's coming in and burn fuel on your body at the same time.
Right.
It's going to select, I'm going to burn this fuel that's coming in and then store this stuff later. So
Right.
when you're eating fats and carbs together, you're just setting yourself up to gain weight. You're basically on a bulking plan.
Yeah, all the best tasting things are fats and carbs in combination. You think about
good things.
ice cream, right? Everybody likes ice cream. Everyone likes cookies. Everyone likes pizza, burritos, right? With queso and cream cheese and beans and a tortilla and rice. It's loads of carbs and fats together. It's pretty much the killer, right?
Yeah, and people can get fat on a high protein diet too. I mean, all you have to do is just add the stick of butter to your steak, which I've seen carnivores do time and time again, and then complain, why am I stagnating? It's like, well, yeah, you're eating
Yeah,
free fats.
that's
Yeah, it's a lot of calories. A ribeye steak
yeah,
is
that's
actually a
one
lot
thing
of
we've
calories.
noticed as well, is that there are anecdotes of people who gain weight on a carnivore-based diet. So that, like, for
Oh
example,
yeah.
they may not even be fully carnivore. They might be, for example, drinking like the bulletproof coffee, which we used to do, but now we've come to realize that it's hands down one of the worst things that you could actually be consuming if your goal is fat loss. So, but yeah, poorly structured fat and carbs are going to be destroying your fat loss journey. And protein is interesting because here's my stance on protein. I think that protein is very important and it should be the centerpiece of your diet. However, with the power of food processing, you can manipulate protein to favor a positive intake too, which is something we have started experimenting. Like the recent 30-day, which is going to go to like a 100-day ultra processed food diet, I am actually doing exactly that. I'm going all the way up to about 250 grams of protein per day and still ranging from 2,000 to 4,000 calories, despite that. So it's crazy how manipulations in protein which becomes
Oh
crazy
yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's the power of food processing, and also sort of like it's like a double-edged sword. That my question then becomes is like, what if we just replace all carbohydrates with protein? When we replace all fats with proteins? So we'll find out once the experiment is done. I'm gonna do some very high protein days as well, go all the way up to like 50%. I've been able to hit that on one day, and see if that would make a difference in reducing intake. When you get when
Probably
you
not. I just did a renal failure.
if you if you give me lava cakes and a pizza and some tasty food right after that I haven't eaten in a while, then no amount of protein is going to stop me from that. That's one thing that I've noticed. Yeah, so that's what the experiment has been. Is like I'm doing like protein loading during the day. So the first part of the day is like protein shake with like chicken fajitas, whatever you want to call them, pulled chicken, all of these things, salmon sausages, all these things that take me at a baseline of like 150 grams of protein by midday, and then at nighttime I'm pigging out with these like high calorie, high fat, high sugar, and high carb food, and that just destroys the
Yeah.
whole diet in just one
Yeah.
fell swoop.
No, you know what? It doesn't work. I did that. That was my whole thing. I would sandbag carbs and fats, and then I would just eat, 90% carbs and fats in my last 1,000 calorie meal. And I would find like 45 minutes later, I wanted to like grab a piece of something or a snack on something, right? And I was like so frustrated, I've been opening myself up to eating more carbs and a little more fat. Not a lot, but like a lot more than I was in the morning. Like I'll have a big slice of sourdough bread that my wife makes with a slab of butter on it, and I had the oatmeal this morning, instead of just trying to sandbag and get 150 grams of carbs in at dinner and kind of thing. Now I'll do like 50 grams of carbs at each meal, so to
Yep,
speak,
it's a
and
very
I found that
interesting
works
balance.
better.
Yep.
Is there any, is there any sort of like last things that you want to try to, or that you would like to talk to people, not just about health and nutrition, but just, in your experience, you both have really interesting stories. And I think it's really cool. I mean, Fahad, you have that experience of being born in the U.S., being raised in Pakistan, living back here now. So you've seen kind of through different cultural lenses, and you've had a lot of insights and revelation from that, which I think is very interesting. Corey, you've had a very interesting life. You weren't adopted, right? You had a stepdad, though. Was that what it was?
Yeah. So
Were you
I
adopted?
met my I met my mom and dad, my blood father.
Sure.
He left us at the age of 1, I believe.
Okay.
And then I met my stepdad around that same age.
Okay.
And my mom's like, "Oh, you called Travis your dad the first time you met him, and he just started laughing at you." And then he became my dad.
Okay.
We
Right.
got married when I was 2, and then I signed adoption forms at age 18. But I've always called him dad. He's always been dad.
Oh, that's cool. Age 18. Wow. So you guys have both have these really interesting, childhoods and sort of adolescent age and growing up. And so you have these dynamic perspectives, which I feel like has contributed to your ability to be so constantly challenging norms, challenging yourselves, thinking outside the box. And also you guys are different people, right? So then you bring both that quality that you both have, but with the different sort of backgrounds that you have, it makes this really incredible, robust spectrum of ideas and this sort of incentive for growth and learning and discovery, which I think is a fantastic combination. And I think it's what's going to make Keto Geek and whatever else it is that you guys develop that into and that evolves from that really successful. Like there's no doubt in my mind. And so it'll be cool to look back on this podcast when you guys are, knowing a household name, so to speak, and kind of see that. But there's no doubt in my mind. I'm wondering if each one of you, just in life in general, you wanted to just spend, it doesn't have to be, long-winded per se, but just a brief sort of word of wisdom or something that you can offer people to think about that you have sort of come to realize in your lifetime up to this point that has been enlightening or kind of like a very interesting perspective or something that's benefited you that you'd like to share with other people. Maybe we'll start with Fahad and we'll finish up with Corey before we get off the...
I think that one of the most important lessons, which I brought up initially, was lead with questions. Your mind has the capacity to gravitate towards dogma, and being in a very conservative and religious family from childhood and then experiencing the politics, the lifestyles, and all the radical parts of society, I've come to realize that you're going to become lonely once you become more tempered, but much more when you have the capacity to step back and observe things rather than be a pawn for somebody else. You'll get better insights, you'll become more wiser, but at the same time, you will distance yourself and take a much difficult road in your journey to become a better human being. Besides that, talk to people, get to know them, enjoy life. It's too short to be someone else's foot soldier in life. Go engage with your neighbor. Go talk to someone at an event. Don't be afraid of that. And once you start taking up these little things in life that evolve you further, you're going to notice that the ripple effect translates into your workplace as well. Your relationship with close people that are your family, for example. And so you got to create your own path in life. You got to create it's kind of like playing the Tetris game. You got a bunch of blocks and you got to fit them in the right pieces and just evolve from that in every domain and aspect of life. Step outside your comfort zone. Your happiness will never be found inside your comfort zone because you adapt to it. And that's true because when you go to a vacation, even if you go to Hawaii, you'll spend 3 weeks there. You'll have fun. And then you're going to get bored of monotony. We're creatures of novelty and hunting and chasing experiences. And here's the shameless plug. That is why we created the Energy Pods, because I was working 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours. I wanted to save time so I could spend it doing something I want. Recently, I just picked up guitar, and I'm going to start shredding like crazy. Shredlock. That's going to be the name.
All right.
Sherlock Holmes.
All right. Okay. I think that's amazing. That's great stuff, Fahad. Thank you. Corey, anything you got to add here, kind of in a similar vein?
Yeah. I think two things that I really realize that are super, the two true currencies that we have as human beings are one, time, and two, honesty. Now, you need to respect your own time and respect other people's time. Why? Because it's literally all we have. This is our waking existence. It's pretty cool to be in a flesh bag that's powered by freaking electricity running through my nerves. Like it's such a wild concept to think about, not to get too existential on the podcast. But yeah, time is so precious, and you protect your time with honesty. Honesty keeps you with integrity, and having integrity is good in life because it gives you presence, and having presence in life, it helps you attract things that you want and want to do in life, which is good. So being honest with yourself first, is going to help you stay honest with others. And then the more that you're honest, you really don't want to spin lies and spin stories, because that requires maintenance and that requires too much energy. And then suddenly you wake up and you're freaking bald and you have bags in your eyes. And
Hey now, you're hitting too close to home here. I'm missing some hair back here. All right.
Hey, you look good, man.
David Lee looks sharp, dude.
You rock the look.
You're like more shredded than like 90% of the people, and 99.9999% of the people.
Than the average person, yeah. I once upon a time, probably 3 years ago, I was definitely what I would call shredded and all that, but I found that wasn't really very sustainable, at least not for the long haul. So I've added some calories and carbs, and maybe lost a few points on the body fat scale, but I'm feeling okay.
Hey,
but
you're tipping the scale towards the dad bod.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, and another thing I want to leave the audience with, I've noticed I talk to a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of my friends, people I care about, including my family, and I believe that people let others rent too much space in their own heads for free.
Right.
Don't worry about what other people are thinking. Don't worry about what other people think of you.
It's hard.
Don't worry about what you are doing in the world, and just go do good things. That's all you have to do in this lifetime. Be good.
Be good. All right. Those are both, you guys have amazing perspectives, and I think it's cool that you guys are working together. I know that I've definitely been blessed to have you guys in my life. I consider you guys great friends. And my hope is that through decanting you and your stories, that people can experience you guys just like in the way that I've experienced you guys, my family has, because I think that's something to sort of tune themselves to. They can tune themselves to the experience of listening to you and how you express yourself, how you describe your experiences in life, how honest you guys are, how willing you are to take risk and to step outside of what the norm is, and also to just keep things simple and be happy and not worry about things too much at the same time. And so I think that's a really cool yin and yang that I see as a theme with both of you guys. So yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm glad to get you guys on here. Thanks for doing this last minute and everything. I know we kind of just put this together, but I think it turned out well. And so is there any way, just lastly, like where can people contact you guys, or where's the best place for them to reach out to you? Is it social media?
So,
Master handle that one.
So for the business, it's Keto_Geek, or you could also visit the website, www.ketogeek.com, and you can buy our products, which are the energy pots. You can visit our stores, where we're all the way here in Napa, California. You could go grab our product there and support our vision and cause. It helps so much. We have our own podcast, but we're kind of slow on the podcast sort of release stuff. You can find those podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, basically wherever you want. Or you can find everything's under the Keto Geek. And then Energy Pods is our brand, our child brand. So you can find Energy Pods on Instagram as well. I think it's energy_pods. And then in various different places in social media.
Yep.
Yeah. And as far as personals are concerned, you can always send me at Fahad at KetoGeek.com. And I think Corey, yours is Corey at KetoGeek.com as well. So.
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty easy.
All right, guys. Thank you for your time, and thanks for shooting this episode. And hopefully, we'll have you guys on again too. It'd be great. I think there's so much to talk about. We can focus on other things too. But I think it was great.
Heck yeah, man! I look forward to more of it.
Yep. All right. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.